At my graduation party, my parents announced something that left everyone in shock. I didn't speak. I left. Years later, they begged for my help. I can still feel the fizz of champagne turning flat in my hand as my dad tapped his knife against the glass. The clink cut through the hum of chatter, pulling every head toward him. For a heartbeat, it was the warm pause before a toast, the kind you give when the night is already perfect. Instead, his voice came steady, formal, carrying something heavier than congratulations. My mother stood beside him, her smile fixed, her eyes giving away nothing. I didn't know it yet, but they weren't here to honor me. They were here to make a point. After careful consideration, my dad began, scanning the room rather than looking at me. We've decided to make some important changes to our estate planning. As of last week, Daniel will no longer be included in our will. A faint gasp rippled through the crowd, but he kept going. This is due to a lack of respect for the values this family stands for. The words hit like a sudden drop in temperature, sharp enough to burn. My mother nodded once, sealing the statement like it was a boardroom decision. Nobody asked for clarification. The silence that followed felt like judgment, heavy and unspoken. I didn't move at first. My hand tightened around the stem of my champagne glass until my knuckles ached. I scanned the crowd, hoping to find one face that looked confused, supportive, anything. Instead, I saw pity in my aunt's eyes, embarrassment in my cousin's, and a smirk on my younger brother Jason's face from his spot near the buffet table. Heat rose up my neck, pooling in my cheeks. My first instinct was to ask why, to demand an explanation. But something in me snapped tight. Words would just give them more to twist, more to hold against me. So I set my glass down on the nearest table. The sound of crystal touching linen was louder than it should have been. I straightened my shoulders, turned on my heel, and walked toward the exit. The double doors felt a mile away. Every step stretched out, each pair of eyes tracking me, as if I were part of the night's entertainment. I didn't look back. The night air hit me like a bucket of cold water. The muffled music from inside seeped through the walls, cheerful and cruelly out of place. My car was parked 2 blocks away, and the walk felt endless. With each step, I replayed the moment, wondering if there had been some misinterpretation, if maybe I'd missed a joke. But no, my father didn't joke about money, and certainly not about inheritance. I drove home in silence, the dashboard lights casting a pale glow across my hands gripping the wheel. The adrenaline faded into something heavier, a mix of shame and fury that settled deep in my chest. I hadn't just been humiliated. I'd been erased in public, treated like a problem to be announced and dismissed. Lying in bed that night, I stared at the ceiling. I thought about the long hours I'd put into the business as a teenager, bookkeeping on weekends, inventory checks during school breaks. I remembered the times I'd postponed plans with friends because Dad had called, saying he needed me at the office. And yet, in one calculated sentence, it was all gone. I didn't call them the next day. I didn't answer when Jason's name flashed on my phone. I knew whatever explanation they gave me would be polished, rehearsed, the kind of speech meant to pacify, not to tell the truth. I wasn't ready to hear it, and I doubted I ever would be. Instead, I sat in my apartment with the blinds drawn, letting the unanswered calls stack up. Somewhere in the middle of the second day, I caught myself staring at my graduation gown, still draped over the back of a chair. The sash looked ridiculous now, its bright university colors mocking the idea of achievement. I'd worked hard for that degree, but the people whose approval I'd chased for years had made sure the night would never be about the diploma, only about their judgment. I didn't know it yet, but that night would mark the beginning of a permanent shift. I wouldn't just drift away from my family. I would cut the cord completely. The ties that bound me to them, obligation, guilt, shared history, had been frayed for years. My father's announcement didn't just sever them. It burned them to ash in front of an audience. And I knew there was no sewing them back together. The next morning, I sat on the couch in yesterday's clothes, staring at my buzzing phone on the coffee table. The missed calls list was a wall of familiar names. Jason, my parents, a couple of relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. Each one felt like an invitation to step back into the same arena where I'd been blindsided. I wasn't about to walk in for round 2. Jason's name lit up again. I let it ring until it stopped, then flipped the phone over so I wouldn't have to see it anymore. An hour later, a text came from my cousin Laura. "Call me." You need to know what's going on. Against my better judgment, I dialed. She didn't bother with small talk. Daniel, you need to understand. Jason's been working on this for a long time. What do you mean? I asked, though my stomach already knew. He's been telling your parents for years that you don't appreciate what you have, that you waste the opportunities they give you. Every argument you've had with them, he's spun it as proof. Even stuff from college. He told them you were too independent and didn't need their help. I laughed once, sharp and humorless. So independence is a sin now? It's not just about independence, she said. It's about the business. You know how it was always supposed to be split between you and him. Of course, I knew. The company had been in our family for 3 generations. My grandfather built it from nothing after the war. My father expanded it into a regional name. From the time I was old enough to count invoices, I'd been told it was our shared legacy, mine and Jason's, something we'd run together when Dad retired. We were supposed to be equals. Laura's voice dropped. Jason's been pushing them to hand over control early. Says it'll streamline decision-making. And after last night, I think he's almost there. I pressed my hand to my forehead, trying to process it. So, cutting me out of the will isn't just about money when they're gone. It's about taking me out of the picture completely now. That's what it looks like, she said quietly. The weight of it settled in my chest. My parents' announcement hadn't been a sudden punishment. It was the final move in a game Jason had been playing for years. One I hadn't even realized I was in. Every time I'd been too busy to visit, every disagreement about how to modernize the business, every time I'd pushed back against Dad's my way or the highway, Jason had been right there, turning the volume up on my supposed disrespect. I thought back to last night's smirk. He hadn't been surprised. He'd been satisfied. I ended the call with Laura, thanking her for telling me. But the second the line went dead, the apartment felt smaller, the air thicker. I got up, pacing from the kitchen to the living room, replaying conversations from the last few years. The way Dad had started calling Jason the steady one. The way Mom always brought up my city life, like it was some phase I'd grow out of. It was never about the occasional argument or the fact I'd moved out. It was about control, and the business was the crown jewel. My stake had to be erased for Jason to hold it all. By late afternoon, the phone was still buzzing every hour. I turned it off completely. If I kept listening, they'd find a way to drag me back into negotiations I didn't want to be part of. That night, I opened my laptop and started looking at jobs in other cities. Not just to get away from the heat of the moment, but to make sure I was never within arm's reach of their games again. If the legacy they valued so much could be rewritten behind my back, then it wasn't mine to protect anymore. The decision felt both heavy and freeing. Heavy because I knew leaving would mean losing more than just the family business. I'd lose the last scraps of connection we had. Freeing because I realized those scraps weren't worth what I thought they were. By the time I shut my laptop, I knew I wouldn't just be leaving town. I'd be leaving the version of myself who thought loyalty to family meant standing still while they cut you off at the knees. The first autumn in the new city felt like breathing air that wasn't filtered through someone else's expectations. My apartment was small, 1 bedroom, mismatched furniture from secondhand stores, but it was mine. No reminders of family portraits, no suggestions on how I should decorate, no silent inspections of whether I was living the right way. The job I found wasn't glamorous. A mid-level operations role at a logistics firm, long hours, and the occasional weekend shift. But it came with something I hadn't had in years, control over my own schedule. Nobody was keeping score of how many hours I put in or comparing me to my brother. The paycheck wasn't massive, but every dollar felt earned, not inherited. Most nights, I'd walk home from the office through streets lined with coffee shops and used bookstores, letting the city's noise drown out the leftover voices in my head. That's how I ended up at Café Marlowe one rainy Thursday. The place smelled like fresh bread and cinnamon. I ordered a coffee, sat by the window, and pulled out a book, happy to watch the rain bead and slide down the glass. She came over with a refill before I'd even asked. "You look like you could use another cup," she said, her smile easy. Not the kind you paste on for tips. Her name was Emily. She worked there part-time while finishing her degree in urban design. We started talking in the kind of way you can only with strangers, lightly, without a script. She asked about the book, and I asked about her classes. The next week, I came back, and she remembered my order. Then it became a habit. We'd talk while she worked, and when her shift ended, sometimes she'd sit with me, still in her apron, both of us pretending we didn't notice the time passing. Emily didn't play games. If she liked something, she said it. If she was upset, she told you why. After years of decoding hidden messages in conversations with my parents or bracing for the trapdoor beneath Jason's friendliness, her openness was startling and addictive. By the time winter came, we were spending weekends together, markets, parks, late-night walks with paper cups of hot chocolate. A year after we met, we got married in a small courthouse ceremony. Just the two of us and two friends as witnesses. No invitations to my parents or Jason. I told myself it was because of the distance, but really, I didn't want their shadows in the room. 2 years later, Noah was born. Holding him for the first time was nothing like the business metaphors my dad used to throw around. Building something for the future. Passing the torch. This wasn't about ownership or legacy. It was about the life Emily and I had built entirely on our own terms. Parenthood changed the rhythm of everything. Sleep became a rare commodity, but even at my most exhausted, I never felt the kind of bone-deep drain I used to after family gatherings. Emily and I figured things out together, trade-offs, compromises, moments where we had to laugh just to survive the chaos. Contact with my parents during these years was reduced to stiff, obligatory calls around the holidays. My mother's voice would get that brittle politeness, asking about work and the little one, without ever using Noah's name. My father rarely got on the line. When he did, it was to offer unsolicited advice on finances, like I'd been sitting around waiting for his expertise. Jason never called at all. I'd occasionally hear through Laura that he'd been expanding his role in the business, traveling, buying property. I stopped asking questions. Every time I let myself get curious, it only led to that old, raw place where I remembered how easily they'd cut me out. By the time Noah turned 3, my life in the new city felt solid. I had a wife who had never once used my past against me, a son who thought my terrible pancake shapes were the best thing in the world, and a home where I could walk in the door without bracing myself. The family I came from had been replaced by the family I'd chosen, and the one I was raising. For a while, I thought that meant the story was over. I'd closed the door on them, and they'd moved on without me. I didn't know then that doors have a way of opening when you least expect them, sometimes because the people on the other side are desperate enough to knock. 5 years after the graduation party, the past felt like something that lived in a box on a high shelf. My days were ordinary in the best way. Morning cartoons with Noah, a commute that smelled like coffee and rain, calls with Emily about dinner and pickup times. I hadn't heard a word about the family business in years. The silence had been its own kind of peace. On a Tuesday in late spring, my phone lit with a name I hadn't seen in a long time. Laura. I was between meetings, standing by a window that looked over a row of food trucks. The sky was the color of copy paper, the kind of day that promises nothing and keeps it. "Hey," I answered, already bracing for news that didn't belong to this life. "Daniel," she said, lowering her voice like we were still at the kids' table and the adults were nearby. "Do you have a minute?" "Sure. It's your parents," she said. "And Jason." I waited. "His big investment," she went on. "The one he wouldn't stop talking about? Tanked. Badly. I don't have all the details, but whatever they parked in it. Company cash, lines of credit. It's gone. Creditors are calling. People are getting nervous." I leaned my forehead against the cool glass. "How bad is nervous?" "2 properties listed for quick sale," she said. "A supplier posted publicly about outstanding invoices. And I heard the bank's been asking to review terms." That phrase, review terms, landed like a cold coin in my stomach. I thanked her and hung up, then pulled up public records on my lunch break. It didn't take long. Notices of default were filed on a couple of commercial mortgages. A lien was slapped on a warehouse I used to chase a soccer ball behind when I was 10. Numbers never lie. They just sit there quiet and let you do the math. I didn't tell Emily right away. Felt like inviting a storm into the kitchen. When I did, that evening, Noah was lining up toy cars along the edge of the table, making each one honk twice before it moved. "So," Emily said gently, drying a plate, "what are you thinking?" "That I'm not surprised," I said, "and that I don't want any of it near us." She nodded. "If they call, what do you want to do?" "Let it ring," I said, only half joking. The phone rang the next morning. My mother's number. I watched it buzz until it stopped. An hour later, my father. I let that one go, too. It felt childish and also necessary, like holding a line I'd drawn a long time ago with my bare hands. They tried again that night. I muted the phone and read Noah a book about a bear who couldn't decide if he was sleepy. He put his head on my shoulder and snored theatrically. When I looked at the phone later, there were 2 voicemails. I didn't listen. The next day was Saturday. Emily took Noah to a birthday party in the morning, and I stayed behind to fix the front door latch that had been sticking. The apartment smelled like lemon cleaner. I had just gotten the screws seated when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. Through the peephole, I saw my parents. My father was in the same kind of jacket he'd always worn on weekends. Casual, expensive, pretending not to be either. My mother was wearing a scarf that didn't match the season. For a second, I just watched them like a scene on a screen I could pause. When I opened the door, all 3 of us smiled, the kind of smile people make at funerals. "Daniel," my mother said, and the word came out shaped like the past. "Hi," I said. I didn't move to let them in. "We tried to call," my father said, already a reproach. "I know." Silence filled the hallway in a tidy rectangle. I could hear distant laughter from another floor, the plumbing knocking somewhere as a neighbor turned on a tap. "Can we talk?" my mother asked, glancing past me into the apartment as if the right answer might be hanging on a wall. "Emily and Noah will be home soon," I said, because the truth is sometimes a shield. "This isn't a good time." "We won't take long," my father said. "It's important." That word again. Important. It had done so much work in our family. It had outranked birthdays, canceled plans, and taken up chairs at dinner. I stepped back enough that they could come in without brushing against me, and that distance felt like a boundary I could put my hands on. They stood in the entry, suddenly smaller without the stage of a party or an office. I offered water out of reflex. They both said no. No coats came off. No bags were set down. We were all pretending there was a reason to be polite. "How have you been?" my mother asked, as if the past 5 years could be folded into a polite question. "Good," I said. "Busy. How are you?" My father's mouth tightened. He looked at a framed photo on the console table. Noah in a park, cheeks round, hair sticking up in the back because he'd fallen asleep in the car seat. My father's eyes flicked to mine and away. "That him?" he asked. "That's Noah," I said. They both nodded. It was like they were acknowledging a weather report. There is a particular awkwardness to watching your parents meet their grandchild for the first time in your hallway, separated by more than distance. When Emily and Noah came up the stairs a few minutes later, the elevator chiming down the hall, I felt something inside me braced. Noah ran in first, full tilt, the way kids do when their home is a track meet. He paused when he saw 2 strangers in our entry, then looked up at me. "Hey, buddy," I said, crouching. This is my mom and dad." Noah blinked, processing, then gave a shy wave that used his whole arm. "Hi," he said, and then, because he is the kind of kid who fills silences with questions, "Do you like dinosaurs?" My mother smiled too brightly. "Of course," she said, like there was a correct answer to earn a prize. "What's your favorite?" he asked earnestly. She glanced at my father, then back at Noah. The big one," she said, and I couldn't tell if she meant Tyrannosaurus or the weight of this moment. My father said, "You're getting so big." A meaningless truth, as if size were the thing to comment on when you haven't met someone in 3 years. He did not kneel. He did not ask Noah anything beyond his age. They both hovered, hands unsure of whether to be pockets or gestures. Emily stepped forward, offering a polite handshake, and in that small motion, there was more grace than anything my family had ever taught me. "Hello," she said. "I'm Emily." My mother's eyes roamed the apartment the way you look at a hotel room you didn't choose. "You've made it nice," she said, which somehow landed as both a compliment and an audit. "We should sit," my father said, but he didn't move to do it. Emily caught my eye and tilted her head. "Your call." I nodded. "Noah," I said softly, "why don't you show Mom the new puzzle? We're going to talk for a few minutes." He took the cue with relief you can only see if you know him. He tugged Emily's hand toward the living room. She looked back once, and I gave her a small smile that I hoped said, "I've got this." When it was just the 3 of us by the door again, my mother folded her hands. as if beginning a prayer. My father cleared his throat. For a moment, I could almost see younger versions of us superimposed. Me at 15 with a report card. My father with a lecture. My mother smoothing the air with empty words. The old choreography wanted to resume. "We're in a difficult situation," my father said. "I figured," I said. "It's not what you think," he added automatically. A reflex that belonged more to Jason's explanations than his. I didn't ask what I thought. I waited. "The market turned," he said, as if markets did anything else. "Jason's expansion plan." "Dad?" I said, and the word felt strange in my mouth. "I don't need a briefing." He stopped, recalibrated. "We wanted to see you," he said instead, like that had been the point all along. "You could have seen me sooner," I said. "At the courthouse when I got married. At the hospital when Noah was born. You had chances." My mother winced. "Daniel, we—" The front door opened a crack, and Noah peered around it with the lack of boundaries kids have around interesting moments. "Can I have a snack?" he asked, not caring about legacy or leverage. "In a minute," I said. "Ask Mom to help you." He nodded and disappeared, the door swinging shut again. The silence he left behind was bigger than his body. "We didn't come to argue," my father said. "We came because we thought it was time." "For what?" I asked, though I knew. "To talk," he said, which meant more than the word held. It meant to ask. It meant to pull me into the gravity well I had moved states to escape. "I'm not deciding anything today," I said. "This isn't the place." I let the sentence be a wall. My mother's eyes softened in a way that might have been real or might have been what she did when she wanted a softer landing. "Could we take you to lunch next week?" she asked. "Just to talk properly." I studied them for a long second. The lines in my father's face had deepened. My mother's lipstick was the exact shade she'd always worn. They were themselves and not themselves, older and somehow smaller. "Text me," I said. "I'll let you know." Relief flickered over my mother's features, quick and guilty. My father nodded once, as if a deal had been made. They moved toward the door without trying to turn this into an embrace. At the threshold, my mother hesitated. "He's a sweet boy," she said, as if that observation earned her a point. "He is," I said. "He doesn't need anything from you. That helps." She flinched just slightly. "We'll be in touch," my father said, and they were gone, the hallway swallowing their footsteps. I stood there a moment, hand on the doorknob, feeling the way the air in the apartment shifted back toward us. Emily came over, eyebrows asking a question. "Lunch next week," I said. "Maybe. Do you want that?" "I want to choose," I said. "That's new." In the living room, Noah had lined up his cars in a straight row. He looked up. "Snack now." "Snack now," I said, and carried him into the kitchen. That night, after Noah was asleep and the apartment had shrunk to the soft sounds of a dishwasher and the city outside, I lay awake and watched the ceiling. 5 years had stretched a clean sheet over the past. Today put a wrinkle in it. I didn't know yet what the ask would be, only that it was coming. Creditors don't circle for long. They land. I reached over and took Emily's hand in the dark. "It's starting," I said. "I know," she whispered. "We start too." The knock came right after dinner, just as Noah was stacking his last puzzle piece into place. I opened the door to find my parents again, this time with Jason in tow. He was in a suit that looked like it had been slept in, hair flattened on one side as if his morning had started with bad news and gone downhill from there. Emily stayed in the kitchen, Noah beside her, but I knew she was listening. The air in the hallway felt warmer than it should, like the conversation had already started without me. "We won't take much of your time," my father began, hands clasped in front of him like he was pitching a boardroom deal. "You've already taken a lot of it," I said, leaning on the doorframe. Jason looked at the floor. My mother glanced between us, clearly hoping someone would cut the tension. "It's about the company," my father said. "You've probably heard." "I've heard it's in trouble," I said. "What I haven't heard is why that has anything to do with me." My mother exhaled, trying for patience. "Because you could help us keep it afloat. You're doing well here. We wouldn't ask if it wasn't serious." Jason shifted his weight. "It's not just about us. It's the employees. Their families." I laughed once, sharply. Funny. Last I checked, this was all yours now. Your empire. Your vision. Your expansion. I made the word sound like a bad investment because it was. Jason's jaw tightened. This isn't the time to drag up the past. It's the perfect time, I said. Because the past is the reason I'm not interested. My father stepped forward, lowering his voice as if that would make it sound reasonable. Daniel, family sticks together. When one of us is in trouble, the others show up. I finished for him, right? Like you did at my wedding, or when Noah was born, or when you announced to a room full of people that I didn't deserve to be part of this family's future. My mother flinched at that but didn't speak. Jason still wouldn't meet my eyes. You made your choice, I said. You believed his story over mine. You cut me out, and now you want me back because the parachute you chose has holes in it. This is bigger than grudges, my father said. This is survival. Without your help, the company could go under. Then it goes under, I said simply. You don't mean that, my mother whispered. I do, because what you're asking isn't about saving the business. It's about saving him, I said, jerking my chin toward Jason. And I'm not here to fix the consequences of his lies. Jason muttered something under his breath. I caught the word selfish. Selfish. I stepped forward, closing the space between us. I built a life from nothing after you shoved me out of yours. I kept my distance because that's what you made clear you wanted. Now that the ship's sinking, you're pounding on my door. Emily appeared in the hallway behind me, Noah on her hip. She didn't say a word, but her presence was enough. A reminder of the family I'd chosen. I have my own responsibilities, I said, softer now but no less final. They come first. Always. My father's expression hardened, realizing the answer wasn't changing. My mother's eyes glistened, but she didn't try again. Jason just turned toward the elevator like the conversation was a waste of his time. I stepped back and nodded toward the hallway. Good luck, I said, and closed the door. Through the peephole, I watched them walk away without looking back. Jason's hands were shoved deep into his pockets. My parents' shoulders sagged in a way I'd never seen before, not from age but from something heavier. Emily touched my arm. You okay? Yeah, I said, surprising myself. Better than I thought I'd be. Noah wriggled until Emily set him down, then ran back to his puzzle like nothing had happened. I envied that, the ability to return to something whole without carrying the cracks with you. The air in the park was warm enough to feel like summer had arrived early. Emily spread the blanket on a patch of grass beneath a row of maples, and Noah darted toward the playground, his laughter carrying across the open space. I lowered the picnic basket, feeling the weight in my shoulders ease in a way it hadn't for weeks. The news had come 2 days ago. The business was gone. Sold off in pieces to cover debts. The property stripped from the family name and scattered to whoever could pay. No headlines, no dramatic court battles. Just a quiet dismantling of something that had stood for decades. I'd also heard through an old mutual friend that Jason had moved out of state. No explanation, no forwarding address. My parents hadn't reached out since the day they left my apartment. The silence between us had settled into something solid, like a wall I no longer needed to climb. Emily handed me a sandwich, and for a while we just ate, watching Noah chase another kid around the swings. The simplicity of it, the ordinary rhythm, felt like its own kind of victory. Halfway through the afternoon, our neighbor, Mrs. Caldwell, strolled past with her little dog. She stopped when she saw us. Daniel, she said, smiling warmly. I heard about what happened. You did the right thing, you know, standing your ground. I nodded, unsure what to say. She didn't linger, just gave my arm a quick squeeze and kept walking. But the words stuck with me not because I needed the validation, but because it reminded me that people notice more than you think. We lay back on the blanket after Noah tired himself out, his head resting on Emily's lap while he sipped from a juice box. The sun was dipping low, turning the leaves overhead into a stained glass canopy. I realized I wasn't carrying the weight of their betrayal anymore. It had been replaced by something lighter, almost like peace. Some nights, I wondered what would have happened if I'd said yes. If I'd stepped in to save the business, maybe my parents would have spoken to me again. Maybe we'd be on some awkward path to reconciliation. But then, from the other room, I'd hear Noah's laugh, pure, unburdened, and I'd remember exactly why I hadn't. I hadn't chosen revenge. I chosen my own family. As the shadows stretched across the grass, Noah crawled onto my chest, still giggling from some private joke with Emily. I wrapped my arms around him, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing. The business was gone. My parents were gone. But the life I had, the one they'd once made me feel I didn't deserve, was right here. And it was enough. What would you have done if your parents publicly cut you out of their will, then came back years later asking for help? Do you think Daniel should have stepped in to save the family business? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoy stories like this, stick around and subscribe for the next one.